Hi everybody, I am Paul. I am the CEO for the Chamber of Commerce here in the greater Idaho Falls area, and I'm here with Christian Ashcraft, who's running for mayor.
Yep.
So we're just going to have a bit of a conversation really to find out kind of what's kind of making Christian tick a little bit, and we'll start off with the obvious question, which is why have you decided to run for mayor?
Well, there's a lot of reasons that I've decided, and kind of probably the main thing is I do believe that there's a need to emphasize the importance of performance a little bit more than just the political influences. I think that there's a lot of ways we could do a little bit better at trying to just perform well and do a good job with a lot of different areas. But in particular, I actually had an interesting experience here in this office during my job in the mayor's office that was kind of a big part of leading me towards those conclusions.
Okay.
And so I'm not sure if you want me to talk about that.
Yeah,
right
please.
now,
Let's hear kind of like what is the behind kind of the inspiration to go down this path.
Yeah, so I mean, of course, I've been studying local government and kind of working in city administration. I've been pursuing that towards like city management role for several years. But I was super excited for the job here and excited to move here close to home. And there were just certain experiences like with the Chamber of Commerce that I felt like could have been a lot more value producing for the community if we did have more of a framework that put performance over the politics.
Yeah.
Not sure.
Yeah.
You want me to just kind of keep going down into that story a little bit?
Up to you. So I guess maybe let me ask you a question then. So what does good performance look like?
Good performance look like?
What does that look like for you?
Okay, so I think in the broad terms of it, everything, like what we care about, what cities do and what any organization does, is the decisions and actions they take, right? And for me, good performance means that your decisions are informed by specific goals, and you have a specific logical path to obtain that goal, and you see how this decision helps you on that path. And when politics is kind of coming first instead of performance, it's more like, okay, we've got some political interest in doing a specific project or program or initiative. How do we make that fit into our framework of goals?
Yeah.
And so it's kind of really where that decision is coming from. Is it coming from we have a goal we're going to meet and this is going to help us get there? Or is this there's people that want to do something and we're going to make that fit for what we want to do?
Mm-hmm. And so what would you say then if for the citizens in the community, what should that high performance look like from them looking in at the city council then and looking at the mayor's office?
Right.
Like what?
Probably, yeah, like really facing for the community. The difference that they probably notice is that when it's politically driven, it feels like there's a lot of information thrown at you to prove that it was a good decision, that it was a good idea. And it's so much information that it's actually kind of hard to like really understand the why behind it. Whereas if it's performance driven, it's very clear, and they say this is the goal, right? Then maybe it's the ratio from income to the housing prices. We wanted that ratio to be at this point, and this is how close we've gotten. And performance also will show that sometimes they're not making the progress that they'd like to see. Whereas like political, you just kind of always get this, well, here's why it was great. Here's all the data that kind of, here's all the information that shows that it's good. And it makes it a lot harder to understand versus performance being very clear to the public. If somebody looks into it for 5 minutes, they can see, hey, like I know what the goal is, know what they did, and I can see how that moved the needle a little bit.
And you think that, given that you're feeling this way, that there's quite a lot of folks that are looking at some of the communications that are coming out of the city, that there might be perhaps, I guess what the ratio split might be between what you think is performance and what you think is political in terms of decision making. Do you have like an idea what you think?
An idea of kind of the ratio?
What you think? Yeah, just kind of looking at the way the city's been formed.
It's hard to say a ratio, and I don't necessarily think that people are doing it like intentionally. I think it's more of a result of when you're not sure how to create that
Yeah, so
goal,
you're talking about clarity.
like you don't know how to create the goal and you don't know how to identify a clear path towards it.
Yeah.
It's obviously easier to say, well, so and so has ideas, and we can get enough people to kind of support that a little bit and put money in that direction to make it look like we're getting stuff done. And it doesn't even mean that the decisions they make are always bad either. It's just kind of, that's the process of making the decision versus like, hey, we have a strategic plan that's put together and we have the goals identified and we've identified the tools that we can use to get there, and we're using this framework to make the decisions. And I think obviously for the city of Idaho Falls, it's going to depend on every department and every specific initiative. So like Imagine IF, as much as people kind of criticized it a little bit, that was actually kind of a goal of having a little bit of a strategic plan to frame decisions around.
Yeah.
So that to me was a good attempt. Now it was kind of a first big attempt, so it needs to be scrutinized, and there's a lot that can be perfected with it. But I appreciate their attempt to build a framework for the decision making for growth.
Yeah. So I think a lot of folks also don't know kind of like, typically that's what cities will do, is that they'll at least like throw the idea out of, here's what we think may happen. Doesn't necessarily mean that's set in stone though either. And so would there be some, if you were to be elected, would there want to be some changes or adaptations to that Imagine IF document?
Oh yeah, there'd definitely be adaptations. I mean, it's been 5 years. To me, it would make perfect sense. I mean, even if you created the plan at first, that you would probably have a couple years of regular revision, and you'd say we might have to amend some things, and a 5-year bigger revision would totally make sense for most strategic plans, especially if they're new.
Yeah.
But the goals, the ultimate goals, should be relatively concrete. And I don't know, reading through the Imagine IF, there's a lot of ideas, but I don't know how clearly, especially to the public, it expresses this is the specific goal. One of the specific goals we're trying to achieve. Is it, they say affordable housing, but what does that mean? Are you talking about the income level? Is it median income and how affordable a median house is to that income? Is that your goal? And what benchmark are you trying to get that to? It's like, you should have a concrete goal, and then as you go through the every year and you revise and report and you say, okay, well, are the actions we're taking moving the needle? Are we making progress towards that goal? And that's how you hold a city accountable as well, because people, if it's too fluffy and not clear, it's really hard to hold them accountable to anything.
People want some tangible things they can hold on to, for sure. So let me ask you this then, because obviously you spent a period of time working with the city. When I first moved here, the city had won an award for, or being kind of classified as the best performing small city in the United States. And so I was asking the question whether that was on purpose or if that was a fluke.
You're right.
And it happened, it's 3 times now, I think, that the Milken Institute has kind of classified it.
You're right.
Falls as
So that's the Milken Institute study, right?
Yeah.
And so, on purpose is hard to say, because the Milken Institute has like a formula that they use. It's like an algorithm.
Yeah.
And so they've got certain things that they have chosen that they feel like this is what it means to be a good performing city. And then from the data they collect, they are like, oh, Idaho Falls matches that.
Right.
And so my question would be, well, what is it that is in their algorithm?
Yeah.
What is it that we're talking about? Because is it that the property values went up immensely?
Sure.
And I don't know that a lot of people in the community would feel like, well, that means we're a best performing city.
And I would agree with you. What kind of why I asked the question, right?
Right.
Because so I started doing some digging on the Milken Institute and the criteria around it. And a lot of it is actually some similar things to what you say in terms of job growth, median household income, household affordability, and kind of like the lifestyle, surplus income, disposable income, those kind of things. Those are kind of things that they were kind of looking at. Yeah. And so it's just interesting to correlate that. If you are looking at performance-based results, does that align with someone like the Milken Institute's algorithm to then determine whether Idaho Falls is in fact the best performing city because they actually meant to do that.
Right,
Versus
yeah,
it just
versus
being
it just happened.
happening.
Well, and I think the big question is, does the community of Idaho Falls agree with the definition of a best performing city? Does the
that's a
Milken
good
Institute?
question.
Because, the Milken Institute may, if you were to say, well, Milken Institute, maybe they really like the growth of the high density housing,
Mm-hmm.
but maybe a lot of the community is kind of on the fence and not sure whether that really means we're a best performing city, right? And so
Yeah.
I think we should have our own definition
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of community driven and public opinion
Mm-hmm.
informed.
Mm-hmm.
That is what is a good performing city for us? What does that look like? What's our vision?
Mm-hmm.
And if that gets us on the list of some other organizations' best performing city, that's cool. But what matters most is that we're achieving our vision of what we want to do.
And I guess the flip side to that is the counterbalance that, listening to some other folks who are also running for city council seats, both in Am and Idaho Falls, is that they actually don't necessarily want the growth either, and so do we want to, as a city, be advertising ourselves as the best performing city?
Sure, yeah.
Either, right?
Yeah,
so there's a flip side to that, too.
Do you want to, market our city as a great place to live out to the country so people go, move here? And that's a good question, and I understand that there's a lot of people have different motives behind their hesitancy for growth, right? Some people are really worried about the infrastructure, and they've got some infrastructure issues close to their home, and so they feel like it seems a little, jumping the gun on growth a little bit if we're letting a bunch in and we still have infrastructure breaking down. That's a legitimate concern. We have to make sure we plan appropriately for that. Some people just, they just don't like having more people here. And that's a tough question because some people like having more people here, and obviously businesses as well, they like having more talent here. They like having more customers here. There's a lot of different conflicting interests when it comes to what growth means to people, and I think it is a big enough issue that people are concerned enough about that we should probably map that out and kind of say, okay, well, what are the reasons? Get everything on the table. What are the reasons that people are worried about growth? And what are reasons that are justifiable reasons that we can do something about and say, yeah, that's a real reason we need to influence something? And then what are reasons that are not necessarily bad for people to have, but not reasons that the city should be interfering with growth over that reason, because there is the legal boundaries of how much you can take away property rights in a sense. So.
Yeah, and that's been a hot topic of conversation actually. Watching the mayoral candidate forums and things that I think there should be a little clarity around what the city actually can and cannot do legally when it comes to people's property rights.
Right, and the motives behind it, because there may be tools that you have the power to use and create, but some of those tools are also your legal ability to use it depends on what your motives are. You can't just do a moratorium for any reason. You have to have justifiable reasons to do so.
Right.
And you can't just take away a developer's ability to build what they want because you don't want it. You have to have a justifiable reason, and that doesn't mean that there are people that have other reasons, but we just don't have that ability as a city to interfere with certain kinds of reasons.
Yeah. So other than I guess growth, what's else on the kind of top of your list of things that you'd like to tackle if you'd be mayor?
Well, overall, it kind of goes into that performance over politics, where really in every area that we are focused on, we should have a framework that we're able to make progress in that area, collaborate in that area, and report to the public and hold ourselves accountable. That's just doing good work. And for you, I think the Chamber of Commerce, I'm I'm not exactly sure why we haven't yet got a specific economic development strategic plan that incorporates, Chamber of Commerce and other entities that deal with businesses and the private sector. We don't have a, a plan of what our goals are as a group for our community.
Yep.
And, that's just something that you're kind of flying blind a little bit, and you don't know how many people are doing the same thing as you, or they're working against you.
Yep.
And to have that unity and that collaboration be really solid and well informed is really what we need to be able to overcome a lot of the challenges that we're facing.
I agree with you wholeheartedly there. I can speak to that from a chamber perspective, is that's definitely something that the chamber wants to see. And it's taken a minute I've been only in this job a couple of years now, but kind of if you look back over the history of the town, from the formation of the chamber has always been involved with a lot of those conversations, the sort of definition of what are we doing next and where we're going, and what kind of economy do we want,
Right.
And how do we identify as a city and as a region, so it kind of, the other kind of component to what you're saying also is in terms of taking and breaking down some siloed thinking. You also have to do that a little bit with your neighboring city and the county also. To get that joined up thinking.
Yeah, and the state, because the state has the Department of Labor and Department of Commerce, and those are huge partners when it comes to economic stuff. They also have housing, different departments that work with housing, and there's a lot of state partners that we need to be able to leverage, because if we just try to do everything ourselves, we're not going to do a very good job.
I agree with you. It does take some joined up thinking. Plus, I think with the growth that has happened here, that that is just something that has to happen in order to be proactive versus reactionary. And I definitely feel that it's not. I wouldn't necessarily argue either that growth has just happened either. I would say there has been some strategic thinking around what kind of jobs we like, especially when it comes to the lab, especially when it comes to our hospitals, when it comes to businesses bringing their technology into the area and tapping into our talent pool. There has definitely been some of that, but from an economic perspective, we'd love to see that magnified and structured, and that there should be some performance component to it.
Right.
It's well needed right now. I'm not entirely sure either, though. If you were to kind of look at a best practice city, who would you look at to compare Idaho Falls against? Right.
Well, in terms of economic development, and you could probably do this in any area. There's some national or international organizations that have a lot of information about this exact kind of stuff. I was just reviewing some of the stuff from the International Economic Development Council, something that I had looked at while I was working in my job, but in 2014, they created a document that was all about how to measure your performance in economic development. And they've published in there almost 300 different metrics that is just like a shopping list that you could pick from. And it lays this whole framework out of like how to pick good ones and how to adapt and what maybe works better than others, and even they have sources for the information that you can use. And there's a lot of people that have been through some of the same problems we're facing, and they may have had a different vision of what they wanted to accomplish, but they learned so much about it, and they're willing to share that information through, International City Managers Association. There's a bunch of entities out there that have so much information, and you're going to look at every city a little bit differently. Some cities do really good with the economic development part. Some cities do really good with managing growth. Some, and you're going to basically try to identify what cities we would like to pull some ideas from, and you're going to inform that with also the knowledge and the opinions and ideas and thoughts from the community. Because, our community is different. We can look at like other cities on the East Coast and we can look at their ideas, but we always have to ask, how does that idea, how would that work here? Because we know we're different, and we want different things. And so, to answer your question, there's not like one core city,
No.
but there's a lot of cities, and there's a lot of professionals out there that have done really good work that are eager to help. The Economic Development Council, they have a program where you can partner with other cities, and their professionals will come and look at what you've been doing to measure your economic development performance, and they give you feedback, and they evaluate kind of how well you're doing at it. And it's a very good way to tap into a lot of knowledge. We don't have to do things by ourselves, and we don't have to just do our own ideas. We don't have to reinvent the wheel, right? And we do want to invent how we want our community to look in it. We want to invent our own vision, but it should be informed by all the assets that are out there.
Yeah, I appreciate that perspective for sure. So let's say you win the mayoral election. What is day one like for you when you think about all the city staff that are there who are kind of looking up to you? What is day one like? What's the message you're sending to your employees?
To the staff?
Yeah.
So a big part of what I want to express to the staff of the city is that I want to have an expectation for high performance and like really good work. And one of the biggest reasons that I would push for that is because if there is that high standard, and if there's clarity that clearly shows how people are performing and how well they're doing and how far we're progressing on initiatives, what we're doing wrong and what we're doing good, if we have that clarity, then I know that I can back with full confidence any employee of the city, right? If the standards are high and the information is clear, it's very easy to talk to the public and say, I understand your concerns, and let's get to the bottom of it. I have no doubt that we have really competent and talented staff that, sometimes mistakes happen or some things get overlooked and we need to take care of those. But I can say with full confidence we have staff that genuinely cares about doing a good job, and we've got a high standard for them, and they are all working really hard because they care about this community and what it turns to be. So that's kind of the message that I want to push to staff, because, they shouldn't feel like, oh, we're going to cut all this stuff. You shouldn't feel on edge. You shouldn't feel like, you've just kind of got to like prove yourself or you're going to be out of there or anything. I don't know. You don't want people on edge. You want them unified towards a vision, and you want them to feel like they have a leader who is going to back them up, who's going to support them, who's going to work hard to make sure that they have the resources they need, that they have the training that they need, that they're able to go to conferences and these organizations that have a lot of that information that we can use. Like, you want all the staff to understand that you want them to succeed, and you are going to do anything to make that happen.
So how does that shift in terms of culture to what they used to what you're going to bring to the table?
In organizational culture, the shift, I think a big part of shifting the culture is first like acknowledging the culture that is like your goal. It's the same thing that I said in the beginning with, if you want to achieve something, you do have to have like something you're shooting for. And so I would probably work with HR, honestly, to develop, here are some universal standards that we want to uphold in the city. And what does that include? That includes that, we as public servants, we're not fostering a culture that has animosity towards any of our partners and the organizations that we want to collaborate with. We're fostering a culture that understands that we disagree and that we have different visions and values that we think about, but that we overall see the value of being positive and helpful partners than to try to just fend for ourselves. right? So that's just one component of that culture. Is, another component would be the level that we strive to serve the community, the level of customer service that we strive to hold, and that we want the city to really appear that it values that public feedback and input, and it doesn't view it as an obstacle. It doesn't shrug it off. It doesn't just try to explain away with the nuance. Like, there's real reasons that there's nuance and explanations for why sometimes people are upset with what we do, but we first need to really listen with empathy and to understand where people are coming from, and honestly curiosity of what really is the origin of their concern before we jump into explaining it away or just kind of shrugging it off.
Do you, it'd be good to kind of get an example of what you think could be one of the first things you could tackle to help kind of have that shift happen.
Right.
You thought about what that could be, what could be the first kind of project or whatever it might be to help tackle and make that adjustment.
Yeah, so honestly, one of the first things that I was attempting to do in my job, in my position, and this kind of goes back to where I had some experiences here in this office, was I was going around, and I had a sheet that I wanted to that I wanted to fill out, like this outline, but I was going around with this sheet trying to understand what was the main drive for other organizations, what their goals were, what their values were, and what resources they had, and what kind of activities what programs they would use to try to achieve their goals. Like, I was trying to go get a real understanding of what people were wanting to do. So I had that sheet here, and what I was a little surprised by was I feel like I was a little met with more, like, people were automatically defensive, and that I wasn't sure why. I had just kind of started here, and it's like, I'm just trying to come learn about your organization, and they were really defensive. And I think, looking back on it, and now understanding maybe how some of the organizations have felt, I think that the city really needs to start out, kind of going back to that statement within the city for the staff. They need to just start out with a statement, a real pledge almost. I'm not sure, it could be a code of ethics, but they need to start out with a statement saying, hey, we are wanting to collaborate with people and interact, not to, have a hard hand on things, not to try to control things or influence things, not try to get our way or to get our own benefit, but we are just genuinely interested in the organizations that we should be collaborating with. We want to really work together, and let's review all of our relationships and try to see how we can augment them and make them better, with this mutual understanding that we might be different, but we care more about collaboration than just kind of arguing over differences.
So that's an interesting thing to hear, that you yourself, during your time as economic development, felt that apprehension, I guess that suspicion.
Yeah.
And that there is barriers, I guess, that exist, that definitely do need to be worked with to develop those kind of relationships. And I think, from our perspective, from a chamber perspective, we're growing significantly. We're doing extremely well, and a lot of that is because we have a clear mission and a clear purpose, and actively trying to be that voice, for the business community.
Right.
How do you see that relationship working? If you were mayor today and I'm still sitting in my seat as a chamber CEO, how would you like for us to have a relationship?
I mean, I think we should have a fantastic relationship. Obviously, being able to exchange the information and just have an interest in each other's initiatives and goals, I think goes a long way. I think as well, just really trying to find ways that we can support each other and You know, sometimes we can't really support each other in
Sure.
ways that maybe we would like to,
Mm-hmm.
but to try to find ways of how we can help use information or just support each other in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
For the chamber specifically, you know, because you're kind of like traditionally you're an advocate for the business community, and you would honestly be a really great partner in the city trying to build buy-in and understanding from the business community on any initiative or thing that we're pursuing that really affects the business community. You know, when impact fees were, you know, established, that's a great example. Is, you know, as you're doing that, would you'd be working with the Chamber of Commerce to say, okay, like, how do we create this policy together with the business industry? Not just an idea from us, but something that we've really fleshed out with the business community. They've had their voice included in there, and we can at least confidently move forward knowing that we were all involved in the process. I think that would be huge.
So I really appreciate that. That's exactly the kind of relationship that the chamber wants to have with the city. I guess the other question then would be, so how would you handle the situation where I might disagree with you or you might disagree with me?
Right.
How would you handle that?
Yeah, so I think that's a great question, and I think the answer usually, the best answer is usually to be prepared beforehand, right?
Yes.
To have a plan, and you say, okay, we're going to disagree on some things, so we kind of need to have a decision process that feels fair. You know, is it always that like the city just does what it wants whenever you disagree with it, or you do what you want whenever you disagree with the city, or, you know, is there a way that you resolve that disagreement and that you can at least maybe negotiate? You know, some people really refer to a negotiation as the process to kind of mediate between those disagreements. But a big part as well would probably be to map out the values behind your disagreement.
And I say that because I think a lot of people still think that the chamber is a part of the city.
Oh,
it's
yeah.
an organizational structure.
It's basically a government, yeah.
Kind of your quasi-government or whatever is kind of what I get told. But it's very much a separate relationship, but founded on commonality, and that we want to see the community thrive, and that you're looking at it from one perspective and we're looking at it from the other, and we're hoping that we can collaborate and kind of meet together and do something awesome, amazing.
Yeah.
Because I think also the private sector, for the most part, believe that the city can't do it all by itself, and that it does need to have some public-private partnerships. You know, so how would you like to see that utilized more?
Public-private partnerships. Well, and before we maybe move to that, just the thought that while you're talking about the, you know, disagreement stuff, is there's like a concept. It's called like a steel man argument. You've heard of probably straw man argument and stuff, but a steel man argument is really when, you know, say like you disagreed with the city, and then the city, to do a steel man argument, they would do every possible thing they could to try to prove you right before trying to prove you wrong. And I think taking that approach really does build a lot of empathy, and it makes you know that even if we disagree at the end, that we really sincerely care about what you think, what you believe, and in your perspective. Like, we've done a deep dive into what makes your decision different than ours. And I just think that's kind of an important approach that people can take, rather than being very like defensive early on and just saying, well, we disagree with you, and now I'm just trying to prove myself right as much as possible. It's like, try to prove the other person's case too, you know. And so anyway, so your next question was kind of about let's see, the public-private partnerships. So do you have a specific types of public-private partnerships in mind when you're asking that?
I guess like some, I would say that there's definitely some scope for some consideration, especially when you're dealing with growth in housing. and for there to be some affordable housing here in the area.
Mm-hmm.
The chamber would very much love to work with the city on addressing that issue, for sure. And maybe even looking back over the history of the chamber, it was the chamber that got folks together to build the Belleville Hotel.
Right.
And so they got members involved, and everybody kind of invested in this one particular, property. Go back to the founding of the chamber back in 1904 when part of downtown burnt down. It was the chamber that kind of formed together and raised $700,000, a lot of money.
Yeah, raised lots of money
to rebuild the town, which is why we got those brick
Right.
buildings in downtown, because of the result of the fire and the code being created as a result of the chamber advocating for better buildings, and helping fund it. And so after kind of doing a little bit of kind of studying on the history of the chamber, it just got me thinking and how important it is to kind of have your history inform the future.
Right.
And that it's been done and it's been tried and tested already. And so why not consider a partnership between the chamber and the city to maybe address an issue like public-private partnerships in housing, or even recreational spaces, or recreation center, or whatever it might be.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I think probably the challenge comes, I'm not like trying to say like it's a bad idea or anything. Just the challenge is that like there are, probably you could come up with thousands of ideas of different types of public-private partnerships, right? And so this kind of goes back into you need to have a strategic plan with your strategic goals that you're trying to achieve, because that's going to inform your decisions of what public-private partnerships are going to be maximizing your ability to accomplish those goals.
And equally to that then is the private sector will generally tell you what they're willing to invest in and what they're not willing to invest in, because they are pretty good at having that data to help them make those good decisions. So it's just why that collaborative discussion is important.
Yeah, so I think it's huge. And going back to the performance over politics, it's really like, people may come up with an idea, and we have to have the ability to say, okay, they want to partner on this, it sounds like a good idea, but how does it align with our vision? Or how can we tweak it, or how can we make it more aligned with the performance aspect, so it doesn't just look like we're just partnering, because I know you, because you're one of my friends, and so you had an idea, we'll fund that one, but another person I have no idea. But kind of giving everybody an equal ground to participate in that partnerships towards the ultimate goals, I think is a very important space. But I think we need to leverage our different talents and skill sets and functions and roles. Absolutely, we need to have those partnerships.
So let's fast forward in time here. We're kind of coming close to the end of your first term.
Well,
How, you kind of done your 4 years, right?
Okay.
And you're thinking, I might do this again. Or you're thinking, heck no, I'm tapping out. Right?
Right.
But let's just say it's a great experience and you're loving what you're doing. What would you like to sort of define or have defined your first term in terms of like those key performance indicators, that performance component? You want to tick certain things off the box that you said, we managed to achieve those in my first term. What would you say are the kind of top 5 kind of priorities that you'd like to focus on?
Yeah, within 4 years, it would be hard for me to just think of like top 5 priorities, but some of the big things that I do think are important is, I think, public satisfaction possibly would be like a metric that I would really care about a lot. Like, and what I mean by customer satisfaction, you could probably define it a little bit better. But I want by the end of my term to be able to have proof that we've moved the needle on the public's confidence in the government, the local government, to do its job well and incorporate the public's opinion. Like that, to me, is probably the ultimate measure of success.
So let's stick with that then for a second, because I really like that thought. The big hurdle that you will have November 4th is turnout. So that, to me, should be kind of, you're looking at the scale of engagement to 0 completely apathetic to 100 being perfectly engaged. How do you kind of address something like getting the community fully engaged, and moving that needle so that there's greater participation in making such a big and important decision as voting a mayor in?
Yeah, so I have been thinking about this a lot, and I was kind of on my own just pondering the different roles of, I kind of use the word trust, right? The trust between the public and the city. And that trust is a huge role. And one nuance, I guess, with it is, like you say, there's a bunch of people that aren't involved. And some people will look at that and say, well, it's because they're not unhappy with the process, right? They're okay with what's going on. So potentially that's a form of approval. And in thinking about this, I kind of determined, well, there really are like three sides to that quiet group. There's people who are like that. They've maybe interacted with government and a little bit, or they know a little bit about it, and they're not worried. They feel like the government's going to do a good job at accounting for everybody's side and making sure they plan things well. They're just not worried they're going to do. They think they're going to do a good job, so they just want to focus on kind of their life. So that's a good sign. But then there's apathy, which is more like they've lost trust in even their ability to influence it. And so they're like, well, I would participate, but nobody's going to listen. Nothing's going to change by my participation, so why waste my time? And that's a bad sign. And then the third one is like, people are just maybe unaware so far. Like, they just haven't interacted. They haven't thought about how government might impact them yet. Or, and I think we need to have a better understanding of where our community is at for that silence. Yeah. Like, how many people do trust it? How many people are being apathetic because they feel like we won't listen? And then how many people are just unaware, but once, they probably will come to us at some point, and we need to make sure they can have a good experience so that they lean towards trusting us versus leaning towards apathy. Yeah. So that's the whole silence part. Right. We need to understand, and that the only way to understand that is to try to reach that audience, which is a huge challenge. So the approval in that space matters. And I just kind of I know it took a long time to talk about that, but that's just a chunk of, even though there's a lot of people who may not turn out for a vote, that just means we don't know whether or not they trust us or not. But all the people that turn out for a vote, yeah, I guess like they would be able to express through their vote kind of what they think of the government's performance and how they've been doing. But to me, going back to the trust concept, I care more about people's trust that will be fair than people's trust that will do what they'll want, right? Yeah. To make them happy. Yeah. And I know that makes some people unhappy, right? Some people just want the government to do what they want. Right. And so that can be a tricky thing to measure. How do you, but you're trying to confirm that people, when they're involved, they feel like you listen, it's meaningful, and their input is taken into account, even if it doesn't lead to the outcome that they want. But we listen and we care about what they think, and we incorporate it when we can. Yeah.
And that, obviously that comes back to communication, transparency. So have you considered what are the kind of communication elements that you're going to use to help at least get that engagement moving in the right direction? Right. Have you kind of considered how are you going to do that?
Yeah, I think for communication specifically, there's probably two big pieces of it that I would focus on first. First one being clarity of the information being given. Is it something that they can easily understand and use to be engaged? Does it answer key questions clearly and easily? So that's kind of boiling down your information. You have to ask questions about, well, what kind of questions do they want the answers to? Not just, here's all the information, right? You got to ask those questions. You've got to put yourself in their shoes. The second part that goes a little bit more into how you get them more engaged is the relevance of that information.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a challenge, because if you just published, even if it was simple and clear information, if you published it about every single thing the city had to do with it all the time, people would just start to tune it out because it's so much. So like you've got to find a way to be able to identify, okay, we've got this information that we need to get to the group of people that are interested in that, so that you're not oversaturating them with information, but you're getting information that's relevant to them. And that's a huge challenge. How do you accomplish that? I mean, that's a difficult question. If you can get people to sign up and say, hey, yeah, I'm interested in all communication about roads,
Mm-hmm.
or I'm interested in housing.
Well, I guess
that's one step.
The comparison, I guess, in terms of everyone's interested when their street's getting plowed.
Right.
No one wants to get a ticket,
Yeah.
or whatever, or have
Yeah.
their car towed. So people see that as a necessary piece of information to receive.
Mm-hmm.
From my perspective, I'm thinking, okay, well, let's take that principle and let's identify what other key pieces of information that people need to hear.
Yeah.
Like your street's getting plowed.
Yeah.
Or there's a road closure.
Yeah.
I think there's principles that could be applied to other forms of communication.
Right. Yeah. For example, if you wanted to say like, we recognize a certain part of the neighborhood that has really deteriorating sidewalks.
Right.
And other things that deteriorate, and we want to do some code enforcement to try to, we're going to cite some people and encourage them to repair their sidewalks
Mm-hmm.
by their homes. Well, instead of starting by just citing people, you could specifically target some information to that community, saying, this is relevant, we're coming through your neighborhood and addressing sidewalk problems and infrastructure problems.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's something that is key to them. It's relevant to them at that moment in time, instead of, just getting tons of information.
Yeah. So let's talk about a couple of other things then that kind of struck me as you were talking
Yeah.
there. One of the key things that I've experienced with some businesses is, especially some of the new startup or folks who just trying to make a living, is actually dealing with the city and getting permits and getting
Mm-hmm.
code information,
Right.
and kind of getting all those things that they need to do to
Yeah.
open up a store or shop. And they struggle with, once they necessarily accessing information, but actually understanding the information and what's required of them.
Right.
So again, coming back to communication, a specific need.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think there's opportunity for you as mayor to maybe look at some of those things and maybe help simplify some of those processes?
Yeah, I do think there's a lot of opportunity, and there's a lot of different components in there. But like, just to kind of relate a bit, I do have my food truck, and I've gone through some of that process,
Mm-hmm.
right? And when we were first operating just for farmers market here in Idaho Falls, I think they were basically just kind of let us be, because they said that the food trucks didn't really, they didn't have a business license that was specific to food trucks yet. We had to get our health
You're good, yeah.
our health permit, but it was just, the city didn't require us to have a license. And so like we were just all like, woohoo, doing everything and working. But like when I restarted it here after my master's program, they were like, well, we've incorporated this, now you do have to have a license, and primarily you have to have a fire inspection, and you have to get a permit. And we had to make a bunch of, we had to invest $6,000 into a new fire, what do they call it, a fire suppression system. Mm-hmm. And some modifications. They sent us a whole list of stuff that were the requirements of what we needed, and so it was a bunch of steps. I kind of went through that, and some of it wasn't like necessarily unclear, but I think that I'm doing local government stuff, I probably have more capacity to understand it than, some people who might want to start a business. And so it could be simpler, it could be clearer, Part of the process that was maybe a little frustrating to me was that they had this list of expectations, but then you find out kind of later that when you talk to a person that, well, they don't enforce all of them. There's just certain things on that list that you have to kind of do.
Yeah.
And that's just a point where it could be confusing.
Yeah.
Like if you're going to say this is what we're going to do, then that you should do that. And if you're going to make it simpler, then make it simpler and make the information you send simpler too. And I get that they're trying to, like I'd say they were trying to be efficient because they were just pulling the same kind of code from like New York,
right,
that, has a fire, permitting program for their food trucks. And so it's easy for the city to just pull from somewhere else and say, we're just going to apply the same thing. And then they kind of, as they do it, they start to be like, well, let's not enforce it this much. And they kind of adjust it, but just like from a staff standpoint, not from a policy standpoint.
Yeah.
And it's easy for them, but it's more complicated and not as consistent for businesses.
Mm-hmm.
And, it is nice when you have a person that's going to be, you might say, like, lenient or more cooperative on, like, what your permitting process is. Like, it feels like there's flexibility. But at the same time, it doesn't feel consistent.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't know if, like, the next person that's going to be in that role, the next time you have to renew your permit, is going to say, well, now we have these, we're changing this. Yeah. And so then you end up doing more modifications again.
Right.
So,
yeah,
I don't know.
I can think of several different businesses that I've spoken with over the last couple of years that definitely felt some of those frustrations, more sort of lack of clarity
mm-hmm.
than anything. No one's saying that they don't want the process to exist. Everyone's sort of accepting that this
right.
is the process,
mm-hmm.
but it would definitely save some time, some money, and a little less stress and high blood pressure.
Yeah.
To have some clarity on simplification, if there could be.
Yeah, clarity.
How we manage
good.
that,
Yeah, to have that clarity would be good. I think part of it is, you basically, for this example, you would enforce it how it is, and then if you see a need for a change, you do have to move that up the ladder and say, all right, well, we see this change, mm-hmm. let's change the policy and update all the documentation to reflect that.
Yeah.
And, you do that regularly to refine it and make it better so it's constantly being informed. And, the thing I probably didn't necessarily mention, but I felt like in my experience, it would have been nice to have more consistent, high-quality customer service through the whole process. Some individuals I interacted with were more frustrating to me, and some of them were, a lot more accommodating and nicer to work with.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for the city, there really should be a standard of how any person, customer, business, whether it's a resident or whatever, any interaction with the people that we are serving should have a certain level of customer service in it.
Mm-hmm.
And if we're not reaching that and we're not consistent with that, then we need to work with our HR department and our managers to kind of address that.
Yeah. So that's, you touched on the word experience there. So you're definitely the youngest out of a pack
mm-hmm.
of three.
Yeah.
How do you kind of like go about sort of looking back over your life experience and your career pathway, your education pathways, to kind of come to the conclusion that you have the qualifications that you need to do this job to high standard.
Right.
Tell me a little bit about like what you think you're going to bring to the table here that perhaps the other two candidates may not bring to the table. And also, I guess I'll throw another kind of thing into that too is, I guess we touched on difference, but what is Christian going to do that's really going to shift the culture? We talked about the kind of customer experience we talked about, but fundamentally, I guess the vibe of the city. Like what? So there's multiple levels.
That's a lot of questions.
And the reason I bring it up because like I remember when I was considering this role, that I truly do feel the weight and responsibility and the hearts of people, and really want to make sure that no matter what type of business that they have, that I'm doing everything I possibly can in my power to be a good advocate for them, and also recognizing I have blind spots, and that there's things I do not know, and also making sure that my ego's in check, making sure that I'm humble, and because I'm making sure that fundamentally I limit the amount of idiotic things that come out of my mouth, right?
Right.
Because I recognize I'm a faulty human being, and so, but with that comes also this this decision that is made, that you're kind of willing to accept all of those things about yourself, that there are things that give me qualification and there's certain components that do not.
Right.
But rounded out, I am here today to present that I am the best person for this role. You know?
Right.
And so how did you kind of like come to that conclusion and kind of walk through that journey that you've had, that Christian's now here today deciding that he is the person that we need to have in our mayoral seat and lead the way?
Yeah, so I'll try to start with the journey and what makes me different, and then I'll try to maybe address the other question, the culture the part that you mentioned. So I said in one of the forums that, you know, I chose this kind of career path, 8 years ago, and I did school for it. Spent hours of school for education for local government management. I did volunteer work, student government, and other volunteer opportunities with universities. And then my work was in HR or government-related positions, or with the City of Ammon, for example. And then I did a side hustle that was the food truck, and my role, so it was me and a partner. He was a business degree, and I was public administration. So my role was, let's figure out the policy, the interaction of the city. How do we, navigate all that process. Yeah. So I focused for over the 8 years. I focused so many hours in specifically developing knowledge and skills, and even relationships that are all directly tied to local government, specifically cities. That's been my focus for 8 years. And no other candidate brings that to the table. And I think a lot of what that really gives me is, I think one thing that the Mayor Casper mentioned in her little news article at the beginning of the election kind of cycle, I think she mentioned a key word of discernment. And, to have an ability of discernment is to kind of be able to have that big picture point of view, and that you can deeply think about and come to some conclusions of what needs to be done from yourself. And I think that the other candidates, while they might be able to do that some, I think that they're going to struggle a little bit with navigating, taking, do I listen to the administrators? Do I listen to my political allies? Or do I, figuring out how to zoom out and acknowledge what all those players say, and then look at it kind of within yourself with a huge amount of knowledge of the factors involved. I think that's something that, I'm not saying I'm sure in 20 years I'll probably be much better at doing that, but I do think my experience gives me an advantage over them to be able to do that in this role. As far as the culture within the city, I'm a firm believer in service leadership. And to me, what that kind of means is you identify how much you should be involved and how little you should be involved. Yeah. And you're not there to say, well, I think the Department of Public Works needs to be run this way, or I didn't like that they did this one thing. You know, you're not there to be deciding certain things about what they do. You're there to empower them to do their job really well. You're giving them the resources and the political support to do their job really well. And you understand that they're not going to be perfect either. You understand that they're learning, and you're ready to defend that. And you kind of cultivate a trust from them by making sure you've got the ultimate goal and the standards, the performance metrics laid out. And you say, yeah, that's what we're moving towards. And I trust you, and I'm empowering you to help us get there. And I want to know what your challenges are. I want to know what's, you know, how you're doing at that and how I can help with that, versus trying to like micromanage it a little bit. I think that trust and empowerment is a huge way that you can shift that culture. Because if they're on edge or they feel like they have to do things your way, then, you know, your way is not perfect, right? And so they're likely not going to get the best results if everybody in the city, all 11 departments, are trying to do things your way. That's not, you know, that's not the best for the community. You just need to empower them to be able to do their best.
Yeah. Well, I truly appreciate you taking the time to talk to me today. And,
yeah, I appreciate you listening to me and asking questions.
Yeah,
and,
for sure. Hopefully it was hopefully you had a good experience. And
yeah.
Like I've said to most people that I've spoken with is that I think anyone that's willing to throw their hat into the ring in the public forum deserves a thank you for doing that and being willing to do that, because it does come with a whole different sphere of responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
And like I mentioned, I always feel the hurts of the people that I serve in this community, and you kind of have to have that servant leadership characteristic to be able to at least throw the hat in the ring, but also recognize the amount of sacrifice that's going to come with that too,
Right.
especially if you've got a young family and
Yes.
you know, things like that too. So, so thank you for
Well,
being
thank
willing
you.
to do that, and thank you for being with me today. And I wish
It's
you
my
all the
pleasure.
best on your campaign trail. And for everyone watching, November 4th, get out and vote, engage, be engaged, and take the time to study out who you think would be the best person for you, and vote with your conscience and your heart. And Christian, I wish you all the best. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.